But we're going to have a session now looking at improving the New Zealand building code, which definitely seems to have been a bit of a theme throughout the day, and learning from California, the UK and Australia. And helping us with that will be moderator Leonie Freeman. We've got Romily Maju from the Chief Executive of the Green Building Council Australia, which is a lovely treat. Great to have you here. Matt's come back to join us on the stage as well, and I think we've got Sam Archer as well, Director of Market Transformation, New Zealand Green Building Council. Here he comes. We've got a chair. Yep, we're all good to go. All right, I'll leave it over to you, Leonie.
Thanks very much, Corin. The future for housing in our country is not preordained. Together we all get to choose what we want in our communities, our city and our country. And we all know that there's a wide range of levers that need to be pulled in a coordinated fashion to resolve many of the blockages and the barriers that we currently know. But I also believe in New Zealand we have the people, the ideas and the companies to solve our housing crisis. One of the key levers that we need to think about pulling is our building code. And from our previous session before, we got some really interesting perspectives from the regulatory and compliance side, focus on safety and what we need to provide, versus the other side around our need for innovation. And how do we go forward, making sure that we can balance both of those requirements? So today we've got three very different overseas perspectives to provide a platform for our discussion on the building code. So to kick that off, our first presenter is Romily Maju, and Romily is the Chief Executive Officer from the Green Building Council of Australia. And she's going to share today her work that she did with the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council. So can I ask you to please welcome Romily?
Firstly, I'd like to congratulate Andrew and the team because it is, in Australian time, it's 2:16. In Kiwi time, it's 4:16, and you're still here. In Australia, that normally wouldn't happen. They'd see that as beer o'clock, and they would have gone. So I really thank you for staying and listening to me because I was getting slightly worried, thinking they'll all be gone, and they'll all be having a beer. So I'm not here to, and don't imagine I'm going to tell you how great Australia is and say you should copy everything we do. Like the rugby and the cricket, we have our challenges in Australia. So including the great Australian dream. I've heard a lot today about the challenges that you have, but you've got to take into context what I'm going to talk about with our work with the National Construction Code, but I think there's some really similar themes. So the great Australian dream of owning a home is increasingly under challenge. From overall affordability of housing and the nature of housing that is being built, to now housing and how it's responding to climate risks. And the Green Building Council of Australia is committed to working with that. So today I'm going to really pick up some themes that you've talked about: the power of a unified approach, collaboration, the impact of the building code and working with government. So the Sustainable Development Goals provide a powerful lens through which to view some of Australia's housing challenges. And the chart that you see here demonstrates Australia's progress in meeting target 11.1 under Goal 11, the Sustainable Cities and Communities Goal. Housing affordability and the cost of living mean many Australians, key workers among them, are being priced out of our larger cities. Thanks. And for more information on this, look at www.stgtransformingaustralia.com. I'm one of the board members of the National Sustainable Development Council who created this work on every single goal. So alongside the challenges of affordability and inclusion is the energy efficiency, sustainability and resilience of Australian homes, and it leaves much to be desired relative to our international peers. We'll admit defeat. Whether we look at air tightness, fabric U values or glazing in our houses, our sad Australian emoticons are a window into your Australian homeowner, sweating in summer and shivering in winter. We're in the midst of something of a residential boom in Australia. Australia's population is expanding at the fastest pace in the developed world, primarily through skilled migration. By 2050, 58% of Australia's buildings will have been built after 2019. 2019 is a really important date and I need you to remember that. Buildings contribute to almost a quarter of Australia's emissions through energy use, and they account for half of Australia's electricity consumption. So responding to some of these challenges, in 2016, ASBEC, the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, delivered Low Carbon High Performance, a thought leadership report which outlined the potential of buildings to lower Australia's emissions. ASBEC is internationally unique as a voice for industry because it represents all the different peak bodies, all those we want, and government across the built environment. And we speak with a single voice, provide practical recommendations for change. And Low Carbon High Performance delivered a roadmap for change. In the context of Paris, the report found with energy efficiency, fuel switching and low carbon electricity that technology already exists today. Because of time, you can look at it and download it online. Low Carbon High Performance recommended a suite of policy measures, which are common sense, but that does not mean it's easy to deliver. These are the headlines of what was in Low Carbon High Performance, but what I'm really here to talk to you about today is the National Construction Code. The first focus for action was supporting an increase in minimum standards through Australia's key regulatory lever, the National Construction Code. So as part of the Construction Code work, and because of perceived pushback from some of our recalcitrant industry associations, earlier this year, ASBEC released The Bottom Line, Household Impacts on Delaying Improved Energy Requirements in the Building Code. Great title. Just go with The Bottom Line. The industry, through ASBEC, raised Australian $750,000, which is a lot in US. In joint research, the industry raised this money with six state governments. So industry and government raised this amount of money as part of the process to do with the National Construction Code. Our National Construction Code is managed by the Australian Building Code Board. So if I keep going between ABCB and NCC, just know I'm talking about the code. So the Building Energy Performance Trajectory Project is an industry-led initiative, and the preliminary results focused on short-term improvements in residential requirements. These are immediate, cost-effective opportunities to improve energy efficiency requirements in the code. Three things. Reducing air leakage is a major opportunity because our buildings in Australia leak like sieves, along with ceiling fans and roof insulation in some cases. ASBEC recommendations including delivering a trajectory of upgrades, and this is really, really important. A trajectory. So every 3 years, like California, our code is changed every 3 years, 2019. There's that date. So every 3 years, our code, we are now working with the ABCB to ensure that there's a trajectory of change, and it's just immediate. Providing certainty to spur innovation and investment. All levels of government needs to commit to establishing a target for and forward trajectories for the building code. So our building code, ABCB, is made up of our national government and our states and territories. I'm not going to go through, you can read here what the recommendations were. So many of you today have talked about the importance of having a meaningful partnership regarding the building code. And I'm going to quote Kevin, one of your speakers here. Our advocacy seeking an increase in residential requirements within the National Construction Code is a continuation of the strong relationship that we have with the Australian Building Codes Board, who oversees the National Construction Code. So in the next version of the code, in 2019, Green Star will become embedded in the code as part of the solution. So currently, under the code, you can either buildings meet the requirement via performance solutions or deemed to satisfied. And in the next iteration will be formally recognised along with neighbours as a pathway, and this ensures cutting red tape. So I just want to very quickly, because I've run out of time, but I'm going to steal some time, I just want to touch on quickly what we're doing in Australia because there's been a whole lot of more themes that you've talked about today. We realise that the Green Building Council of Australia has a strong role to play in delivering sustainable homes. So we have already experienced in the residential market through our multi-unit residential tool under Green Star. We've also used that in retirement living, student accommodation, social and affordable public housing, and Green Star communities, which you've heard talk about today. There are over 60 Green Star communities projects in Australia. Over 37 have already been certified, and many of them include master plan communities. But the other thing that we've done is we have Green Star crosswalks with Passive House and Living Building Challenge. So that means if you get points in Green Star, you automatically get points in Passive House and Livable Building Challenge. We also have crosswalks with Well. We're now engaging with the wider industry, including the volume builders. We're working closely on build to rent, also being talked about today. And we're now piloting different approaches for our own homes tool. So the final thing we've done, again, a lot of people today have talked about engaging with the consumers. Olivia talked about going back to the heart of consumers. We realised our website was not for consumers. So we built a whole other platform. We did it in-house. And we commenced this journey with the development of Living Green Star. And it targets distinct consumer markets to tailor the sustainability messages to unique interests. So you can look up www.livinggreenstar.org.au. So thank you very much. If you listened to Cam today, this Green Star Community project up on screen rocks. It's aura. So well done, Cam. Not that we organised that together, it just happened. Thank you.
Thanks, Romily. And again, emphasising some key themes around a code every 3 years. What about if we did that? Key targets that we all commit to and actually are held accountable for across all the sector groups. And of course, partnerships and real partnerships, not just talking about partnerships, but what does that look like in reality and how would they work together? Our second panellist today has already just given us a fantastic keynote, so really needs no introduction. But it's been fantastic to hear Matt share his view in his keynote presentation, and also I watched him on TV with Corin the other day. So now Matt will present a short overview on how they've progressed the building code in LA. So please welcome back to the stage again, Matt Peterson.
All right. I don't have any slides for this part, but I'll just sort of talk through, I think, the process that I really touched very briefly on in my talk earlier, and that is California is blessed with this great energy code that's been upgraded every 3 years, but when we were looking at how do we move the needle on green building overall to get to indoor air quality, to water efficiency, to resource efficiency, to the life cycle of the products we're putting in those homes and buildings, we really tried to get those early adopters to use the LEED Green Building Standard, Leadership for Energy and Environmental Design, created by the U.S. Green Building Council. We had a staff member that was part of helping create that and define it. And then we worked to get cities as an early adopter. We found them to be the great place to prime the pump, to create a requirement for local, the power of the purse with the local government. So that was a really effective strategy. And then going to some private developers and saying, hey, this could be a market differentiator as you talk about your quicker, when you have green buildings, that you do see higher tenant retention, you see less vacancy, you see better ROI. That is just another piece of the argument of overcoming first cost versus life cycle costs and operating costs. And of course, the challenge for a city or a government is those capital budgets are separate from the O&M budgets, and how do you get those budget officials to begin to talk? Similarly, it's not always easy to get the banks and the lenders and the investors to see the increased first costs on a green building. But we also saw, as the market matured, that the cost of a LEED Gold, LEED Platinum, the highest standards, those cost differentials reduced because the whole system got more used to working and meeting those requirements. So whether it was the subcontractors, the architects, that all began to mature and become more efficient, and we moved the needle. And then moving to California, that private sector green building policy that we put in Los Angeles for 50 homes or more, 50,000 square feet or more, had to be LEED Silver equivalent. And we said equivalent because you got your certificate of occupancy before you got your LEED certification. So the city couldn't mandate certification. So the workaround was that your checklist would have to show that it was certifiable. And then the state of California took that and made it the state requirement, now called Cal Green. So there's 2 tiers in Cal Green. The building code, it's LEED Silver equivalent. You can choose to get LEED certification and spend the commissioning costs and certification costs if you wish, because there is certainly an additional increment of credibility, marketing, as well as verification in doing so. So that's really what I think began to move the needle for us and sort of ramping it up and turning the code into a floor, not a ceiling. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matt, for that. Our third presenter today is Sam Archer, and Sam is the Director of Market Transformation at the New Zealand Green Building Council. But Sam's actually going to share with us today about the UK Building Code and how it has changed over the years and how it's ramped up to achieve the goal of nearly zero by 2021. So please welcome Sam Archer.
Thank you very much, Leonie. I'd just like to start actually, now we're heading towards the end of today's conference. It'd be great if we could, I know that within our team, Joe Duggan has put an enormous amount of effort in doing this conference. If we could have a round of applause for the team at NZBC has put on Okay, so Homestar. There's been a lot of talk today about Homestar. It's a system that scheme that we've been running since 2011. And as you can see from this slide, it's something that was originally conceived with us and brands, and it had a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is a really, really performing home, and actually the building code currently is around a 3, maybe a 4 at a push. And I think, as Minister Salisa mentioned this morning, New Zealand has signed up to the Paris Accord, and really what that means, what a lot of people around the world are saying, is that means that we need to have 0 carbon emissions by 2050. And actually, our sister organisation, the World Green Building Council, is saying that we need to have 0 carbon buildings at least by 2030. And it's something that we've signed up to, something that we believe very passionately in. So what I really want to talk about today, and I think lots and lots of speakers have been talking about this, so this won't be news to anyone, is that New Zealand is a long way behind other nations when it comes to the building code. So thanks to the UK at the time being part of the EU, the UK signed up to the EU Directive on Energy Performance, and that basically signed them up to have a nearly zero energy code by 2020. And actually at the time in 2002, the UK committed to have all new homes 0 carbon by 2016, so we're already past that date, aren't we? So, we're 16 years on from a process, a journey that the UK has been on and really successfully moved its building code on. And what I'm really going to talk about actually is that the recommendation that we have, it's the same recommendations from the previous speakers, is that you have a 3 or 4 yearly cycle of upgrades to the building code. So I'm just going to put a bit of sort of nuts and bolts on this. These were the R values that the UK insisted on around 2002 when they made that requirement. So walls are nearly R3, roofs and floors are 4. So even at the time, actually, the UK was insulating the slabs underneath homes. We still don't do that very much in New Zealand. Windows that are 0.5, so that would be a relatively good double glazed unit compared even to what we're doing here in New Zealand. And from 2002, what the UK did is every 3 years, every 3 to 4 years actually, they tightened up the building code. So the next update happened in 2006, then 2010, and then 2013. And by the time they got to 2013, this was typically, actually your slides, Romily, are a little bit out of date because it's actually tighter than indicated on your slides. This is typically what a house would be achieving to achieve building code now in the UK, so R4, so it's pretty much doubling of the values from 2002. Windows are really seriously high performance windows are going in most new homes in the UK now. There was no requirement for air tightness testing in the UK in 2002. Now the majority of, pretty much all homes are pressure tested as part of their doing the building code. And I'm just going to compare that with our current New Zealand building code. As you can see, that was considerably lower R values than we had in the UK in 2002 and has really not shifted at all. There was a minor update in 2008, but really, really tinkering around the edges. So as I said, the UK now has pressure testing. Actually, it's quite interesting that some of the brands research shows that a lot of new New Zealand homes are fairly airtight, but there's a big big range. So there are lots of homes that are very, very, very leaky still being built. I mean, air pressure leaky, not leaky homes. Moving on. And then the other thing that the UK has moved on to, which is absolutely fantastic, is looking at thermal bridging. So as you pour in more insulation into a home, actually the majority of the heat losses start to appear around the junctions, around windows, around the edges of walls and so on. And so the UK has done a lot of work around proper energy modelling of all of these different junctions and details and come up with lots and lots of standard details. And actually now in the UK, if you're not using the standard details, then you have to do proper computer modelling of those junctions. And actually that's where we start seeing in New Zealand, you see mould even in new houses around those junctions because they're the cold spots in houses. And then sort of third and final thing that we're seeing in the UK is a much higher market share of mechanical ventilation and heat recovery ventilation systems. So in 2014, around 1 in 4 homes was being fitted with a heat recovery ventilation. In the Netherlands, it was as high as 42%. I think that number's probably higher now. I mean, I would add a note of caution, which is that mechanical ventilation systems in homes have been shown in the UK to, okay, they save energy and they improve air quality, but there have been some really big issues with installation and poor use, so that's something that if we see happening here, we need to watch. So, to conclude, what we would really like to see, and I think echoing the previous speakers, is a bit of a trajectory that New Zealand should go on. I've put Homestar as a proxy. Actually, really what I'm talking about is an equivalent energy standard to Homestar. What we would like to see is at least, say, the energy requirements of 6 Homestar by the next couple of years, and then 7, and then an 8, and then on a trajectory to 0 carbon by 2030. This is what government should be committing to. It gives certainty to the industry so that everyone knows where they're heading to. And what it really crucially does, what it did in the UK, is reduce the costs of compliance. So in successive years, as they tightened up the building code, the costs of meeting that higher standard came down. And that is something we would be bound to see in the UK. And then finally, what we would really like to see, and Andrew Eagles has been promoting to government, is government leading the way. And I think that was really brought up by Shamabil this morning as well, is that government should be building in advance of this trajectory so that you get the industry experience behind what they're doing. That's me done. Thank you.
Thank you to all the 3 panellists in providing some really interesting overseas case studies of what's happened in this building code space. And really listening to that, it gives me a bit of heart murmurs and concern when I realise how far we've got to go. However, it's important when you look at things is sometimes look back first, because we can all look to the future and it seems insurmountable. But I was just reflecting when I was sitting here, even if you take something like the Green Building Council itself and how far things have progressed with the Green Building Council and being the voice into the industry of sustainability and change. So what I think we want to think about is where do we go from here to be able to take the big jump that we need to go forward? And then what is all our different roles to play in achieving that? So just some thinking to think about. I thought I'd kick off and ask each of you the question that's just come up on Slido. So the first one is, since some people view building codes as just red tape, what can be done to create a perspective shift that parallels code improvements? Romily, do we want to start with you?
Yeah, I find that question really interesting because in our market it's very different. We've been building to the building code for so many years that it's just seemed as that's what you do. And it was actually the industry that pushed for Section J, which was our energy efficiency changes in the early 2000s. It was the industry that drove the work behind that. So on the commercial side, interestingly on the residential side, that's exactly right. It is seen as red tape, hence I talked about the recalcitrant industry association. So what we can do is the research that we're doing. And when the research that we've done, which I put up on the screen, we looked at the cost, the implication, and cost has been talked about today. So we took on board the challenges and the criticisms that were perceived on red tape with homes, and that was all included in the report.
Matt, would you like to comment on that?
Well, the thought that comes to mind for me is disclosure. So if in California now, homes have to have their energy performance disclosed to the buyers. And it's a great, I think, marketing opportunity. So if consumers, home buyers are beginning to ask questions, or renters, hey, how energy efficient, or you could expand it from there, but just start with efficiency. Is this unit compared to comparable units of size that, of course, is an opportunity for realtors to embrace it. And so I think anything that adds requirements, people are going to, it's easy to say that adds red tape. There's also in the transition, in that market transformation opportunity, how do you use tools like you get ahead further in the line for your permit process or reduce fees? What do you do to get people more comfortable and excited or just used to dealing with higher energy efficiency and other code standards to sort of prime the pump? So on the market-based and, both market-based solutions, really.
Yeah, I was going to echo that comment about energy labelling. So the EU has had energy labelling of homes on point of sale or rent for, I think, 10 years or so. And I think recent research has shown that there's a market value for high-performing homes. So there's a recent study I saw from Ireland, which is showing that if you had an A or B rated home, a bit like an A or B or C rated fridge or freezer, and then it commanded a 10% sales premium. So I think that's one thing we can do. The other thing I didn't mention in my talk actually was that what the UK also did was institute what they called a zero carbon hub. And that was a government industry led organisation that had an office, and it really coordinated the effort towards changing the code over time. And I think it's really important to speak to those people in the industry at the coalface who are building these homes to really understand what are the barriers, what are the issues, how can we get rid of that red tape, how can we make it easier to build better.
Leonie, can I say about the building disclosure? We have a building disclosure for commercial buildings. It used to be 2,000 square metres on sale or lease, and you had to disclose your neighbours rating. And because of the industry, it's been brought down to 1,000 square metres. So the industry said, no, pick us all up, and we will look at homes and shopping centres to come in and disclose. And the ACT government does have disclosure on homes, and it's had it for a long, long time, and it basically says the same, its results say the same thing that Sam said that's in the UK.
So what I'm hearing is that at the moment, sometimes what we've got is we're almost like opposite sides of the ring. I'm a boxer, so my boxing analogy, and we've got the regulators on one side and the industry participants on the other, and we're sort of hammering it out. And a lot of the work I've done around solving the housing crisis, to me, it is about this partnership. It's about actually we can only solve it together. And I don't know how many of you remember that book from years ago, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, right? Well, I think there should be a new one, which is the public sector are from Mars and the private sector are from Venus. And we do come from different planets, but at the end of the day, the only way we are going to solve some of these issues and really shift both what we're doing and people's attitudes to it is basically we've got to get married and we've got to build the same values and true partnerships. So there's something to think about. Okay, the next question coming up on the list is, what are the risks of a significant step change in the New Zealand Building Code? Sam, do you want to kick that one off?
Sure. I think the point's been made by all three of us, which is that I don't think anyone's advocating a sudden step change in the building code. I think we need incremental change, over maybe a 10-year time frame, and that's the way that you avoid those kind of unforeseen kind of problems with suddenly a massive change. I think that's the way to do it.
Can I raise another point, though, that's a concern that you need to think about? One of the things that surprised me today is whenever we have a session or a conference in Australia, it's all about getting to net carbon carbon zero by 2030 for new builds and 2050 for existing buildings, whereas today you've talked more about the challenges in your industry. The longer you wait to change the code, the more expensive it's going to be and the harder it's going to be. So if you don't take on board the fact that this is coming and your country has signed to the Paris Agreement, and all of a sudden in 5 years' time they go, oh God, SHIT, right, here's the code, bang, you're done. That's going to cost you more. So in Australia, we're literally training our industry. It's coming, it's here, it's not going to go away, it's coming, get used to it. 2019, it's on the way. So we're now getting all our members to come out, and they've all said, because we've done a carbon pathway for our industry. And so we've done the pathway on the non-residential, and we're about to do one on the residential. But it's coming, it's not going to go away. The sooner you take this on, the more cost-effective it will be to you.
Yeah, I would just be a little provocative. I'm jet lagged and it's the end of the long day for you all. What if you just put it out there, the big, hairy, audacious goal, we're going to get to net zero energy standards by 2020, and just sit down at the table and say, what the hell is it going to take to get there? And what's really going to happen? I mean, You don't, you know, to get step changes, well, step change I presume means a leap, but you really need to think a little bit outside the box to think about how you're going to make progress, because making small incremental changes at this stage to a code that, from whatever I've heard and understood, is suffering a great deal in relation to where everybody wants it to be. Maybe you need to be a little provocative to force parties to come to the table and say, all right, what would be the problems we'd really face if we had to do that today or tomorrow or in 3 years? And think backwards from there and say, all right, well then maybe we need to get to 50% of the problem now rather than wait till 2025.
And I think one of the key things you've identified is the thought again of how do we make this stuff happen? Because once we leave today, there's been a huge amount of ideas and great information, but the key is how do we get action? And I was just reflecting on what Romily said about the Paris Accord and the goals coming up and what needs to be committed to. But I just want to share with you another commitment that was made back in 1948 by the New Zealand government at the time, and they committed to the United Nations goal of making adequate housing for all New Zealanders. Now, it's been almost 70 years since that date, and we've had a whole range of different governments come in and out. And in 2018, we still do not have adequate housing for all New Zealanders. So maybe it's time that we've got to take a different approach to solving this, because what we've been doing in the past is not achieving the step change at the pace or achieving the goals that we need. So think about that. Okay, one last question. What do you think are the relative roles of statute to regulation? New Zealand has a statute and regulations. Perhaps we should have regulations we can change steadily. Romily, you want to kick that one off?
So that's what we're working with our code to change it. And we work very constructively with the ABCB. And also you can then work with because we have planning requirements at state and at city level too. And you know, our tool, Green Star, changes all the time because of innovation and technology that you've all talked about today. So it has to be changeable and nimble and flexible.
And the 3-year goals, I think is great, because then it just becomes business as usual. It's continuous improvement. Matt?
Yeah, no, the California Energy Code is the same as Australia's, improved every 3 years. The LEED certification standard, the aspirational standard isn't that flexible, but it has evolved a lot over the last decade or so. I think there's been 3 or 4 variations on it now.
Can you quote that? I didn't say it, he said it.
Sam?
Yeah, I think the final point I was going to make about the, I mean, there's another question there about leaky homes, and I think one of the things I've really spotted about the building code is, although Minister Salisa this morning mentioned that it is a performance-based code, actually for homes in the majority of cases it's very prescriptive. There's lots and lots of very prescriptive things in there. And I think one of the challenges we've got in New Zealand is that, as I discovered only last week, 1/3 of resource consents for new housing in 2017 were for apartments or terraced houses, not for the kind of timber single-storey houses that everyone thinks we're building. And so that's just sort of one other piece in the puzzle which suggests that the building code is really not catching up with kind of international standards or even what we're building in New Zealand. So we've got a long way to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, that will bring this particular session to a close, but I just want to remind you and get you to think again about what you will do after today, because these sessions are great, but I encourage you all to do more than just talking and think about what actions that you will take as a result of today, whether it's something specifically around our building code or other things that you can do to help change and improve our situation. So can I just ask you in conclusion to thank again the 3 speakers today? Thank you.